I'm super excited today about our speaker. Her topic, how to hear the voice of God. So this inspiring story is of her journey of waking up from the dream. She's going to share with us her magical story of how one day, while standing in her kitchen after dreaming of God or visiting God, Lothian heard the voice of the Creator speak. An overnight spiritual awakening in 2011 captured Lori into the awareness that life as we know it is a dream, and the self that she imagined herself to be, but a character in this dream. So this journey led her to a profound understanding of her true self, one that I can't wait to hear. So how about if I just stop talking and hand the mic over to Lori, please? Everyone give a warm welcome to Lori Lothian.
Hey, thank you for that great introduction that I sort of wrote. I was chatting
on the rest.
I was chatting with Ken a couple of days ago, so I'm going to contextualize a lot of the material too through the lens of my current passion, which is astrology. And it was really a great opportunity in my talk with Ken a couple of days ago about that to really also share a little bit of the wisdom of the song that I sent to you, the garden song. And the reason I sent that song, as we all know, I think we all feel really pressured right now in a time that is, cataclysmic for the world. And there's a sense right now of where is that innocence and where is that connection and where is that unity that we're so capable of. And there's such innocence in the time of Woodstock and the time of the hopefulness of that Enlightenment revolution that was ongoing in the 60s. So that song by Joni Mitchell makes me feel very hopeful often, and yet also very melancholy. And because there's a sense of being in the devil's garden, as she says it. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about where I have come from in my spiritual journey, but rather than make this a campfire event, I'm also going to talk about how I believe a current astrological signature in the sky, which is rare, can allow us all to enter into that garden willfully, joyfully, and with agency. So let's get going. Sound good? All right. So in the very beginning of my life, I was always a mystic, just so you know. So I've always had a tendency to think that there was more than this world here. And I have had spiritual events from childhood onward. But when I was 39 years old, my mother died. And it was a cataclysmic shift of awareness that began to put me on a path of actively seeking, as opposed to simply having an inclination to want to know who's God, what's real, etc. And that beginning of the seeking at 39 culminated at age 49 in an overnight spiritual awakening. Now, what's magical to me about that, and I want to share a bit about what this offers for us this year, is the agent of that awakening, the doorway, the portal, was a planet called Neptune. Now, Neptune happened to be turning a corner in my natal chart, transiting it's called, like moving into the natal first house. And that's a rare event. Neptune takes 165 years to go around the circle of the sun, which is the circle of the zodiac in a natal chart. So this is a one-time event, this crossing into my first house, which coincided almost to the month of that spiritual awakening. I was 49, it was in 2011. And the journey of that awakening was just catastrophically revelatory. I mean, I no longer saw the world as something separate from me. I no longer saw myself as particularly real. I would describe that for all of you as understanding that my consciousness, the true being that I am, was focalizing through the body, mind, personality of Lori. And at the same time, a huge amount of who Lori used to be fell away, like reactive patterns, habits, worries, anxieties. In ancient traditions, they call those sanskaras, or residual tendencies. But I didn't know those words. I wasn't that kind of seeker, you guys. I was just literally like dabbling. I wasn't like going to ashrams or meditating. I was seeking in my own way for years, Kundalini yoga, a bunch of stuff like that. So that got me onto a whole path of trying to understand a little bit more about that planet Neptune, because I've been an astrologer for 30 years and how it may operate to wake us all up. because this year is an opening for each of us. And I'm going to give you a date this fall where I'm going to ask you all to grab the Neptune by the moment on October 11th, where you have an opportunity to awaken to a greater truth. So Neptune, it has a range of meanings, and so I'm going to talk about that, but one of them is to put you into a trance state, because he is about the alternate theta wave or delta wave states that we're capable of in our brains. So shamanic trancing, hemisync, where we can balance our brain hemispheres, dreaming at night, receiving inspiration, having visions. These are signatures of what Neptune is capable of, as well as opening the doors to a mental illness, illusion, spiritual emergency. There's a range here, and even addictions and escapism. And, a classic Neptune signature in my life was in 2013-14, Neptune came into transit in the sky with a planet in my natal chart, the position it inhabited called Jupiter, and I fell into the clutches of a false guru. And what does that mean? Well, Neptune is delusion, Jupiter is guru, and so a delusion of a guru. And so I was in a very intense place then where a spiritual teacher had captivated my attention, and I had to escape his, authoritarian, narcissistic clutches. So we can see that Neptune has a whole range of capability, and it depends on who we are going into contact with that Neptune and what we're capable of by being able to choose how we will engage with that Neptune. So when I talk about trance states, just so you know, it's very literal. And I think it's important, without overwhelming you with astrology, to give you some examples. Okay, so when we talk about channelers who are well known, like Esther Hicks, who channels Abraham, or Jane Roberts, who is the author of the Seth Speaks material from the 60s. These people have an empowered Neptune in their chart, a Neptune that's hooked up to a major personal planet. And I say personal because Neptune is transpersonal. It takes 165 years to go around a circle on the sun, whereas something like Venus takes less than a year. So the closer something is to the sun and its movement around the sun, the speed is called a personal planet, or a more intimate planet. So the transpersonal planet, Neptune, needs to be connected to something personal in your natal chart, each of you here today, for it to actually be one of the big deal planets in your life. So Jane Roberts always captivated me. I remember reading her book, Seth Speaks, years and years ago, and her idea of the channeling that she came up with was that consciousness creates reality, and that was Seth's main thing, that consciousness is primary. So Jane Roberts, has what we call a fire trine, with Neptune anchoring her north node, or her true purpose in life, in a triangle of fire. And this is an important thing to say. Yes, she has this capacity to harness Neptune in a triangle of fire on the north node to do something Neptunian, which is channeling. But it was in 1963 when she first heard the voice of Seth, the entity that she channeled multiple books from, that Neptune made contact in a transit to her natal 10th house of career, and awakened up a new path for her. Literally came into direct contact with her 10th house in a way that was once in a lifetime. Her 10th house, where her soul's intention is. Her sun is up there. So this became her career. This was no longer playing around with an Ouija board with her husband. This was her calling. John Lennon, who has a powerful earth trine with Neptune, heard the song Imagine and wrote it and recorded it. That beautiful song, because Neptune is about the higher imagination, came through the vehicle or the portal of Neptune. And that song that he recorded in 1971 happened when this transiting Neptune moving through the sky made a perfect connection to Venus in his chart, the goddess of music. And he created a song that is one of the top 10 most played songs in history. And I didn't even know that till I researched it. And so he brought through something. He channeled that. And Neptune was the agent of that, the doorway of that. The last example I'll give you is how high can Neptune go? I mean, we've got a musician who channels an epic song about the power of awakened imagination, and and about the truth of humanity. If you listen to the lyrics of Imagine, you'll learn a lot about what he was channeling. Like imagine, it's really imagine there was no religion. Imagine we were all one. So we have a channeler, Jane Roberts. We have John Lennon, a musician who brought down some celestial music for the collective. And then we have the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, a famous teacher, born with a pronounced Neptune in his chart. And not only is his Neptune connected to the part of his chart that represents a movement, to create a movement of some kind, and planets in that part of his chart, Mars and Neptune are hooked up. Mars and Mercury are hooked up to his Neptune in his natal chart. But when Neptune transited a part of his chart that was connected to the anchors of the place of residence or home, it was when he moved his energy to the United States of America in 1959. He had gone from an obscure Indian teacher guru to starting a movement through his visit in 1959 to the US that became a worldwide meditation movement. And if you don't know who the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi is, he's the founder of Transcendental Meditation. And so, and it's interesting too, when I look back at when he traveled to the US in 1959, his Neptune also bumped into a planet in his chart called Atlantis. It's an asteroid. And it made me think that maybe he's a reincarnated person from the old Atlantean, whatever that lost civilization was. And he was trying to bring goodness and awareness and a new level of spiritual ability to everybody, to the masses. Transcendental meditation doesn't require spiritual belief, it doesn't require religious adherence, it requires learning a technique. So you have three examples, from John Lennon to the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi to Jane Roberts, of the range of Neptune. Now, I'm not going to spend time telling you about the other side, the dark side, in which people who have delusions and have created great harm to the world have a strong Neptune. But there are many psychopaths, many spiritual despots, etc. And so Neptune can go all the way to the other side of that potentiality. So, you know, an example would be the guy with the Kool-Aid, don't drink the Kool-Aid, that became famous, you know, for that saying, who caused a group suicide, and my brain won't bring his name up, but I've done the research in the past, has a very pronounced Neptune, but conjunct a dark part of his chart in a planet of harm and death, Pluto. So you see that this has got huge range, and for me, where we're going to go is it awakened me. It caused a spiritual awakening. So it was a good thing way back when. It got me in the clutches of false guru so I could learn a lesson about trusting my inner teacher. But then in 2018, I bumped into another Neptune transit, a rare once-in-a-lifetime transit, where Neptune, moving through the heavens, came into contact with my natal Mars, and literally was sitting virtually on the same degree of my natal Mars in May of 2018. Now, I'm a non-dualist. I don't believe in God per se or a creator. I don't believe in anything. I just feel reality is here and it's what it is. But I'd had a dream that I was lifted out of my Honda CRV, which has a skylight for real, and I went through the skylight, and I was lifted out by like a blue being. It looks a lot like the Krishna stuff from Hindu mythology, and said, "We're going to visit God." And I don't remember what happened. I have no memory of the rest of the dream. And then I woke up the next day, and I thought that was a strange dream. And I remember crossing the threshold from my living room to my kitchen to grab a coffee or something early, like 7 a.m. I was in the habit of the dawn waking then, and I heard a little voice in my head, my inner voice, but it wasn't my voice. And it said, to hear the voice of God, you must listen with the ears of the soul. And as soon as I heard that, I took note, and I went and I sat down in my window seat and decided to keep listening. And I wrote a book called The Coming Age of Miracles over the course of about 10 weeks, 11 weeks, while that transit was happening, while that Neptune was opening the portal through my natal Mars. Okay, so when you put Neptune and Mars together, that's called the spiritual warrior archetype. And I also have it in my natal chart. Neptune and Mars are connected in my natal chart as well. So I have this capacity to harness this Mars Neptune, and it turned into this event. So this book, which I'll be putting out and giving away for free in the next month or two, had a lot of teachings. I'm not going to tell you what they all were, other than to say that the key point of hearing the voice of God is to listen with the ears of the soul. And that is an invitation to deep stillness. And it is an invitation to sit in the deep stillness, ideally before your day starts. And there is a series of instructions in the book about that. But in the meantime, the simplicity of it is literally without entering into stillness, or you could call it silence, we cannot hear the voice of God. And we all know that, the still small voice of God, the still small voice of the divine, the still small voice of the divine intelligence source, you can call it what you like, is easily drowned out by the clatter of our thinking mind and the noise of our lives. And so I dedicated my mornings to hearing that voice, and I have more or less since done that, and it has resulted in that book and another book that's in process. So I'm channeling the voice of God, and Neptune is the archetype of channeling. My feeling is that for the collective, we're entering into something astrologically significant that is rare enough for me to want to tell you guys about it today, knowing that everybody here is an advanced metaphysician, as Ken said, and therefore I can give you a prescriptive direction coming into the fall about a time in which you can actively choose to enter into the garden, because that's what Neptune is. He's a doorway into the garden of truth, the garden of innocence, the garden of what's truly real. For anyone who's watched the movie The Matrix, that's a Neptunian story, where the character Neo is given the chance to leave the false reality, the dream, and see what is true and what is real. But what people often don't realize with that kind of journey, which Neptune can offer, it's not about the transcendent movement away from the dream. Neptune comes back into the matrix, and he then offers himself to the matrix with his newfound awareness to bring change to the matrix. And he even begins to do what Jesus would do miracle-wise, He can begin to bend the rules of the matrix. And this is a dream we're in, or a matrix. So analogies are like we could lucid dream in our dreams, or we could be like Neo in the matrix. And Neptune is that doorway as well. Neptune is not about leaving planet Earth to live in some higher spiritual bypass state of awareness. That is its shadow. That's the love and light crowd. That's the people who believe, by the way, with the QAnon movement, in which people believe that Donald Trump may be a savior of the deep state cabal who are eating the kidneys and livers of children. That's a psychosis. Neptune can rule psychosis. We're going through that Neptune transit to Jupiter, which can create everything from false gurus and prophets to psychosis to spiritual awakening for everyone here. So we can see what's happening collectively. It's not just for you, it's for all of us to live through this time. So this rare time that we're in is something that happens approximately every 165 years, which is why we need to pay attention. Neptune's particular position in Pisces is not happening again in our lifetimes. And it's happening this year with a special added spice. And for everyone here, I want you to think about, well, before I tell you the date that I want you to harness in October, I also should tell you something about Neptune's discovery, because this planet was unknown to the collective or to the ancients until 1846 when it was found. And if you know your history, 1846 was the birth of the spiritualism movement. It also had correspondence with Emanuel Swedenborg and his teachings as well. And this is the idea that spirit is eternal and that this reality isn't the only realm. And so the spiritualism movement of 1848 was burst into the scene only 2 years after Neptune was discovered. And, there was a couple of kids, like sisters in upstate New York, who began tapping and knocking and rapping and talking to the spirits of the dead. And by the time the Civil War had ended in the United States, believe it or not, I found this out by researching it for this talk, there were 35,000 active mediums channeling the dead in the United States of America. And there were 11 million people who called themselves spiritualists, who believed in spiritualism. So Neptune opened the doors to the idea that those who passed on, who were our beloveds, were still around. And that's the kind of Neptunian story that we are now immersed in. We know Neptune consciously as a collective, so we can harness it. Before you consciously know of something, you can't harness it. So the time of this October that's very powerful for each of us is October the 11th. And that is when Jupiter, the god of dispelling darkness, the guru, the truth holder, all right, that's his highest potential. Like Maharishi Mahesh Yogi was born with Jupiter on his ascendant, the hallmark of a spiritual teacher. So Jupiter has a capacity to be the dispelling of darkness planet and the guru planet. And he is going to sextile Neptune. And he's done it twice this year, February 20th and July 27th. So we can't talk about what you did or didn't do then, but if you want to go back and think about those dates, give or take about a week on either side, you had a capacity for the channeling, the trance, the doorway, the portal to open, for darkness to dispel, for truth to be revealed. And, you know, some key words for that are inspiration, dream, make dreams real, big visions, finding a cause, downloading an insight, and bringing it to earth. Key word, bringing it to earth, bringing it down to earth, especially given that Jupiter in Capricorn doesn't care about your lofty dreams and goals. It has to be real, practical, useful, and down to earth insights, dreams, and visions. So on October the 11th, the last of these pass. Don't forget, this is like 165 years later, something similar will happen. So you will have this, each of you, in some place in your chart. Like, where does Jupiter sit right now, and Neptune in terms of the heavenly bodies relative to the 12 pie slices called houses in your chart? I'll give you an example for me. It's happening in my second house of my earnings and the work and the way I would like to express my voice and message in the world. And so very, very much so. Same with this channeled book. This is about my throat, my voice. What do I want to give, second house, to the world as a message? And so I would say for each of you to consult an astrologer, obviously, or to, I'll give you, the basics. Go to astro.com and put your birthday in there and see, you'll need your birth time, and see of the 12 pie slices, where is Pisces in your chart? And the symbol of Pisces looks like this. Anyway, the point being that place is where this magic is. So some of you will be in your career, some will be in your marriage, some might have to do with your children or your creative expression. For some of you, this magic is happening in the house of your service to the world. For some, it could be even happening in the house of your transformation of your darkest dark nights, the deep dark nights of your soul. So there's places, 12 places this could be happening. For the world, of course, there is no one place, but you can definitely cast charts for countries and say, well, where is it happening for a certain country that this is happening? So we can always identify these individually and collectively by looking at the astrological map and the astrological clock. If I was giving guidance for how I'm going to harness the October 11th transit, I'm going to go into a meditative state in the early dawn hours, which I typically do, but with the express intention to harness Neptune. And the meditation I'm going to do has to do with that, bringing the opening to Neptune to more conscious awareness for you. But in any way that you can, be perceptively open to what the trance state or the reverie or the dreams can offer you around the October 11th date. And the last thing I'd say is that Neptune rules your nocturnal dreams. And so around that time, October 9th to about the 14th, you may be gifted with a dream at night that is profound, or what the shamanic world will call the big dream. And that's the last of those three passes. They're done, February 20th, July 27th, and now this last opportunity. So, and the last is always the best. It's always the icing on the cake. And if you're willing to go there, I believe each one of you here today will have an amazing encounter with the doorway that Neptune is. And it's the doorway to the garden. And that's that. Any questions? Is that how we do it? Or is it meditation next? In modern parlance, Neptune is the god of photography and the film industry, moving images and still images, because we capture reality. See, Neptune is about what is real, and we are capturing reality in a still image or a moving image. And it's just fascinating to think about those photos. I know what you're talking about, because also, this is all happening in the blossoming of the discovery of Neptune. So not just regular like photography, which evolved dramatically in the 1800s, but the spiritual photography that you're talking about, capturing what's not really here. How do you say it? Curulin photography with the aura pictures is very Neptunian.
Yeah.
I think you're getting at a good point there, because Neptune is in a place in the chart that's particularly good for Neptune, even though it's been a really rough year, or like whatever few. Neptune takes 14 years to move through a particular sign in the zodiac, and right now it's in Pisces, which is its modern rulership. So it's, Neptune in Pisces is the most spiritual Neptune will ever be, But in a broader sense, when I move a little bit away from Neptune, for the collective, we're going to experience a type of new energy that comes in, that dawning of the age of Aquarius feel, starting on December 21st, when two planets come together, Jupiter and Saturn. It's called the conjunction of kings. Now, technically, it means a death of a world leader in the year in which that happens. So it's very likely that we could experience it, or assassination attempts, like Ronald Reagan's attempt to assassinate him, happen when those planets join together. But they only join together, Jupiter and Saturn, every 20 years. But they only join together in the way they're going to do in Aquarius. They haven't done that since like the year 462. And so we're looking at a really rare event, and they haven't been coming together in the sign of air, okay, for over 200 years. So, because Aquarius is air. So Jupiter and Saturn come together this year in Aquarius, the dawning of the age of Aquarius, an air sign, for the first time in 200 years, but the first time in like 1600 years or so, at the place that they're doing it. And the reason I bring that up, that conjunction that begins December 21st, it will initiate all of us, a collective, into a new field of energy, the Aquarian field, for 20 years. In Aquarius is about the collective. It's about the we, not me. It's about community. It's about relatingness. It's about oneness. And I feel that the awakening that has begun, the momentum, since Neptune went into Pisces approximately 8 years ago, even Adyashanti said he can't believe how many of his students are popping awake like popcorn, is because Neptune moved into Pisces. But the good news is Neptune now is past the halfway mark. He's at 18 degrees and past what the 15 degree of 30 midpoint is, which means that we're out of the shadowy stuff, where a lot of the less healthy aspects of Neptune have played out, even though we do see it with that Jupiter, Neptune, QAnon stuff right now. That's part of the shadow. So we're coming into the home stretch here for the next 6 years, with Neptune trying his darndest to wake up the collective, and with that new wave of Aquarian goodness that starts for December 21st and 19 and a half years more. And that combination is, I think, hopefully the ticket to the garden. I'm trying to be optimistic,
Thank you.
The coronavirus was instigated by a particular planetary conjunction on roughly around December 12th. And it was predicted by many astrologers the last time those planets came together in the way they did this year was the Black Plague. So we all knew that there was probably going to be, a lot of astrologers had predicted some kind of health crisis for the collective. Other people just thought it could just be a time of hardship. So we're looking at a cyclical return of something that was, portended to happen. Now, moving away from the astrology and why that planetary Saturn-Pluto conjunction rarity in Capricorn that hasn't happened since the 1300s, is here, is that, I feel like it has excavated, I think, and I can see it astrologically, but keeping it simple English, it's really excavated or revealed. It's like, there's a rock and you pick it up and you see what's underneath. And usually we all get revulsed. Oh my God, there's slimy creatures moving. It created such a collapsing of the system by which we run the story of our lives, the monetary system, the economic system, the expectations of what we're supposed to do and be. And we all got what I call the great pause, in March, April, May, June. We've got permission to play hooky on reality. it opened doors for people to what's possible. But on the negative side, it created a lot of anxiety and fear. And so there's been this huge polarity. And, you know, Carl Jung said we don't, get enlightenment by imagining figures of light. We get enlightenment by dispelling the darkness or looking at the darkness. And I think we've only begun to see the true underbelly of fear, disparity, rage, anger, bigotry that exists in the collective field, not just in the United States, but the United States is having a Pluto return, which is very powerful. Pluto's coming back to its birth point when the United States was conceived as a constitutional entity. And so United States is kind of spearheading for the collective something in terms of the underbelly, the darkness. Carl Jung is quite clear. We need to see, we need to look at it. So it's really painful, but it's necessary, I think. It's a clock and a map of each of our lives. And as an astrologer, I'm always eternally fascinated by that. I want to give you that question. You're asking about free will and agency, and as opposed to destiny and fate or whatever. I have a client who channels Jesus, and I have a client who channels David Bowie. Okay, I mean, crazy but weird, true stuff. And the client who channels David Bowie, the dead singer, has the asteroid named David Bowie sitting on her midheaven, which means my career path. The guy who channels Jesus has the asteroid Jesus, actually Yeshua, sitting on his career path. Now, if I was to tell either of those people when they were 12 years old that somehow David Bowie or Jesus are going to be instrumental to their life calling, they might plug that into their mind and go, oh yeah, maybe, whatever. But it's true. They were born to that destiny. And I'm always asking myself that question. How much of my life is mine to choose? I channeled another book by Hermes Trismegistus. The asteroid Hermes is on my first house Saturn, right there as a part of a thing called a finger of God, a mission from God in my chart. Little Lori at 10 years old, if you told her, pay attention to Hermes Trismegistus, the ancient Thoth of ancient Egypt, would say, what? But the 50-something-year-old Lori bumped into this in a channeled session and has created a book with that consciousness called Hermes. So, I love the question and I don't really know the answer, but I feel like when I say something like Neptune can be everything from a Charles Manson or, in which he had a strong Neptune, false guru energy, to the Maharishi Mahesh, which is a brilliant light soul in the world. That range is where we have agency. What are we going to do with Neptune? Are we going to go into the dark fear, deception zone and fall under the spell of an illusion like QAnon, excuse me if you believe that stuff, or are we going to go with the highest portal possible and ask for the voice of God through Neptune, the true voice of our own divinity? So I think that the agency that we have is when we are consciously aware that there is choice. We can choose which level of that Neptune we're going to engage in on October 11th for each of you guys. That's your homework assignment. That Jupiter-Saturn conjunction was associated with both Reagan's assassination attempt, Kennedy's successful one, as well as the Lincoln story. So, it's pretty predictable, and we haven't really seen, we've seen death of political people, but not a leader. So this is never about just like an assassination of a bad, figure, like the United States assassinated the general from wherever he was, I forgot which country. That's not a Jupiter, that's not what this portends. And this is still in play. And it's in play basically roughly 6 months before and after. So we're talking kind of like July now this year till July of next year. We're really expecting either an assassination or astrologically or a sudden death of a very prominent world leader. I love what you just said, coherent consciousness. Yeah, and the next year that you might be feeling into is that all year next year, for the entire year, there's a rare journey of Saturn and Uranus, the god of the internet, in a square. And it will mean that we're going to see more breakdown of existing systems. And maybe even, just to give you guys a heads up, maybe some food chain issues that are quite significant, all right? Like food, lots of places in the world that are having food supply issues. But on the upside of that, Saturn square Uranus, all of 2021, it means how to make the internet, Uranus, useful. And I think we've just seen the very beginning of how much we're going to harness coherent consciousness. I love that, using the internet. Yeah, that's beautifully said. I didn't think of it that way. But yes, because Saturn doesn't means death, right? He's a grim reaper, he's the lord of time and space and karma, but he also means restriction or, some kind of contraction energy. And so Saturn is that contraction energy or the lord of death and karma on the king Jupiter. So yeah, Gore was what it was exactly like a death. Yeah, a death of what should have been. Hmm. If you know roughly what time of day, I can rectify the chart. People make a living doing that. But if you don't know at all what time of day, it takes a bit of time. It's doable though. So if you say, oh, I was born at night or I was born in the morning, that's helpful. But yeah, there's a way to go back into the chart and work on, it's called rectification. It's based on choosing about 15 to 20 major life events. And I go back and see if I can reverse engineer your birth time.
Could you touch a little bit on your book, the first book?
Coming Age of Miracles?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so it's really two parts. One is about the history of humanity on the planet and it's our relationship to God. And the second part is more like, it's called The Way of Miracles, and it's prescriptions and guidance on how to connect to that voice. It's an interesting read. I mean, about, oh my God, I guess it was last May when I was writing it, one of the chapters talks about a coming pandemic and the reason for it. So it's very prophetic, but after the fact, it's not like I published it to warn people, but there was a near-term coming pandemic that was going to be catalytic for humanity is in the book. So I feel like the point of the book is to open our eyes to the fact that each of us has a direct hookup to God, that there's a creator, source, divine self, whatever you call it. And it's a real simple prescription. And once you read the book, you understand that you don't need to be years of meditating, or you don't need to have, an intercessory or someone intermediary between you and the divine voice, which I want to say is really refreshing, because Esther Hicks and Jane Roberts are channeling entities and beings of, I'm sure, great light, but you can't get to them without their voice. And what this book is I'm never going to be going around channeling God for people. God forbid. That's not what God told me to do. God said, tell people how to get in touch with me, okay? And I'm like, okay, I'll do that. But I want to share a tidbit with all of you guys. God told me there's 3 foods we all need to eat in order to open the pineal gland up a bit, and so we can be more receptive to the inner voice. And it's walnuts, berries of any kind, and cacao or chocolate. Now, I know reasons like theobroma and chocolate is, considered to be, nectar of the gods at ancient times of South America. I understand that. Walnuts are a brain food, for instance. But God was just really clear. If there's nothing else that you do, eat berries, walnuts, and cacao as much as you can. I eat them daily now. And a magical story about that is I have nearsightedness, and I had glasses all of my life. And since I started that protocol in earnest in the fall of 2019, I no longer can wear my glasses. I'm visually I'm not 20/20, but I don't need glasses anymore. So I have these glasses I can't wear, including my sunglasses, because I need them for the sun. But when I wear them, everything's blurry. So it even healed my eyesight.
In what quantities?
Oh, I just throw a handful of walnuts and then a cup of berries and a bit of cacao nibs into a smoothie every morning. There is no recipe by the divine. It's just, yeah. So it's cacao. It is chocolate. It has theobroma in it, which is a huge serotonin booster. And I do the raw cacao, that's it's not refined chocolate, but I get that chocolate has a wake-up quality, but the cocoa bean is the coffee bean, and I think it's different than the cacao bean, but I'm not sure.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
I think so too.
Yeah, so cacao, CACAO.